So this is the final episode of Rolling with RAQ Season 1. And I'll be discussing and recapping Episode 10 of Season 1 of Raising Kanan, Pain in Full. In some ways, I feel like the 9th and 10th episode are really one. I view them as they're so closely related in comparison to the episodes where they're not standalones. The storyline continues, but not in the same way as in like the other episodes. Episode 10 is pretty much a continuation of 9, whereas 9 ended with Kanan shooting Detective Howard and begins with him basically running away from the park. So Kanan being Kanan, he's going to mess up. RAQ told him to shoot twice in the chest, once in the head. But he shoots Howard twice in the chest. Then there's some like noise nearby and whatnot, which spooks him. And he runs out of the park, managing to fall in horror movie fashion. He proceeds to the pond where he breaks the gun down and throws it into the water as a means of getting rid of the evidence. He still has on Unique's jacket, is running, makes a call, turns out to be to Scrappy, whereas Marvin is supposed to pick him up, but there's a change of plans, right? So now RAQ's entire crew is in on carrying out this plan. Just a handful of them, but the job's getting done. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Lou wakes up and finds that Bedlam has broken loose, right? Famous and Jessica are there in the lobby of the hospital, and they happen to see when in comes rushing a bunch of police officers on higher ups as Howard is being rushed in. Detective Howard has been shot, and there's now all of this activity out in the street. You see just police cars constantly pulling up. There's a lot of activity. It's a hive of activity at the hospital. Lulu gets up, immediately wants to leave. You know, he gets dressed, walks out of the hospital, and goes out to try to find RAQ. It sounds like apparently he has some idea of what the plan should have been, but he doesn't seem to be surprised that Howard has been shot, but more so that the plan has been initiated. It sounds like he wasn't expected for it to have gone into effect. Heading out into the street, he heads out into the street. Scrappy, meanwhile, is trying to maneuver, right, like the rest of the plan. There's a plan to get Kanan to meet up with his mother, right, and for them to then be with his grandmother. My feeling is that the grandmother, meaning RAQ's mother, is supposed to serve as their alibi, you know, but that doesn't work out because the shooting has resulted in the police pretty much shutting down the area, making it very difficult, like, to get from one area to another, right? And they're trying as much as possible to stay out of the way of the police so as not to bring any attention to themselves. Then in the midst of this, it's unclear, right, if they know, right? They might, because Unique has been hinting at them that, you know, they also have to be aware of his people. A lot's going on here. RAQ has pretty much set off an explosion in South Jamaica, right? The heavy police presence helps because it basically nullifies Unique's crew. He's brought in all of these guys, and it seems like without this hive of activity, Unique would have probably had his people out in the streets gunning for RAQ's people, as like he told them during the pep talk in the previous episode. But with the shooting of Howard and this heavy police presence, there's no way for Unique and his people to move about out here. You know, it would be a bad idea in the midst of all of this for them to be out in the street. You know, so they have to kind of pause their plans for attacking RAQ and her people. Instead, what we see is, you know, a switch to plan B, right? They can't get Kanan to his grandmother's house. So instead, they take him to Lulu's house, which is now a burnt out former crime scene. It's already been searched over, so nobody's going to be paying attention to that house. RAQ is able to take Kanan into the house and, you know, begins working on removing whatever evidence he might have on himself. And, you know, she starts asking him, how did things go? Did you do A, B, C? Most importantly, did you ensure that you shot him twice in the chest and once in the head? How many times did you shoot him? You know, she's trying to go through the list of things to make sure that he did everything right. It's at this point she realizes that he didn't fully follow her instructions. He did shoot Howard, but he shot him twice in the chest. Not twice in the chest and also in the head, as she said. You know, now they might potentially have a problem on their hands if he ends up living. And so from there we see RAQ's plans starting to take shape. And so not just that, but she'd actually given him some clothes and money And he forgets that in Scrappy's car. So he now has to get dressed in some of Lulu's stuff. The unique jacket that had been taken from his car in previous episodes was given to Kanan to wear while he was doing the shooting, right? And Detective Howard, he was then supposed to run past the bodega, which has cameras, so he'd be captured on camera wearing the jacket. Basically, what they're doing is setting it up to visually look like someone wearing Unique's jacket, which would be assumed to be Unique, shot Detective Howard and was then seen running away from the park. Not just that, but like once this happens, Marvin then, goes back into the building where Unique lives with his girlfriend and son, makes his way into Unique's apartment or condo or whatever it is, and basically returns the jacket, but really it's like planting it. Unique is probably noticed by now that the jacket's gone missing, but it suddenly pops back up in the apartment. It's just a way of further ensnaring Unique, creating problems for him. In essence, RAQ is pretty much trying to kill two birds with one stone, getting Unique out of the way, but also getting rid of Detective Howard, tying the two of them together. In that sense, she then removes the two greatest threats to her and her organization. We also see, Jukebox played a part as well in helping feed this narrative to Burke, expressing to her that the police need to be careful, that they've heard that Unique is going to strike back at them. And now here it is that you're going to have this story about someone in this Unique jacket running from the park around the time that Detective Howard was shot. And it's just a way of like framing Unique, which comes together quite interestingly. One thing I will say that kind of gives me pause throughout the series, as I've mentioned before, is the constant expectation that Jukebox is supposed to help protect Kanan. She just doesn't have the same level of care and consideration bestowed on her as is given to Kanan. She's quite often just like left to figure out and take care of things on her own. And as we see here, while everyone is kind of heading for home to stay out of the way of the police, RAQ has stashed Kanan in the room that's supposed to now be the stash house at the bodega until Marvin can come and pick him up. And so, RAQ had given him some clothes and money. This would have been things for him to change into and money for him to hold on to after shooting Howard. She explains to Kanan that he's going to wait there until Marvin comes to pick him up and drives him out of town. That, he'll take the clothes and stuff like that with him. So he'll have, be able to change his clothes and have some cash to tide him over. But with him having forgotten those things in Scrappy's car, she had him just change into some clothes that were at Lou's house. And when she gets to this, but then she sent Jukebox to bring him some clothes and money. Once again, here it is. Everyone else is heading for home. Jukebox is still out here walking around in the street and in the midst of all this stuff going on. Lou is actually dead set against the fact that RAQ had Howard shot, with the intention of killing him, right? He believes, everyone seems to think that this is a terrible idea because of the drama that it's going to bring. I don't know if you've ever, lived in a community when a police officer has been shot. I know there have been a few instances where police officers have been shot in New York. And I'm not like a street person or anything like that, but it's like there then tends to be a very heavy police presence. And in marginalized communities, in Black communities, there's already such hostility from the police quite often, right? When things like this happen, it just ratchets up the tension tenfold. Everyone's kind of lamenting the drama that this is going to cause, but it all plays into being part of RAQ's plan. She leaves Kanan behind at the stash house and heads over to Baisley, where she expects that with Howard having been shot, the police will show force when things like this happen. So she correctly surmises that they're going to raid the projects, and so this is also part of her plan to have with having the two connected units come into play. They're going to search the unit below first because they have to walk up. Remember that the elevators don't work. It's going to take them some time first off to get up to the 7th floor, which is where the lower apartment is located, to search the apartments on that unit, including the 7th floor apartment that she's taken over, right? Before moving up to the 8th floor, which kind of buys her some time, right? So, Lulu shows up and RAQ explains to him what happened, which, he initially suspects that she sent Marvin to shoot Howard, but she explains to him that no, she had Kanan shoot Howard. And that prompts Lulu to state that, he's out of the business. He wanted to leave since the situation with D-Wiz, but now he definitely feels that he can't do this anymore. And that causes a really tense exchange between RAQ and Lulu, because RAQ has set this plan in motion, which Lulu is very uncomfortable with. He's been kind of wanting to get out since the situation with D-Wiz. And here, he pretty much tries to tell her that he's leaving the business. And she tells him, like, no, that is not the course. That is not the plan. That's not what we're doing. And you will not be walking away right now. We're all in this. And, he points to it that his record label is clean. It's legit. They've made enough money where they can walk away and they can do something else. But she explains to him that there's no walking away, at least not right now. They're all in it right now, and they're going to continue pushing forward until the time comes when they can actually leave. As she explains to him, he might be doing the record label thing, right, with clean money. But the reality is that the stuff he's paying for, all that he's doing and whatnot, comes from this illegal business. So in her eyes, everything that it touches is then dirty money. And so she kind of corrects him, puts him on notice to let him know that leaving the business right now is just not in the cards. And it's like a very tense exchange. At one point, he asks her, it feels like, at least from his perspective, that like she's threatening him, that he gets them and like, what she has planned, what she's doing, there's going to be serious consequences to play. The plan was for Marvin to help Kanan leave town, but with the police activity and whatnot, there's a roadblock, one of which Marvin pulls up to. And instead of just waiting patiently and taking the time to go through, he tries to back up. Automatically, whenever there are roadblocks, most often when they spot cars attempting to turn around or attempting to avoid the roadblock, they make it a point to pursue those cars, pull them over, and look into the drivers to see what they have going on. Marvin ends up getting pulled into the police station, which means that while he's supposed to be meeting up with Kanan to drive him out of town, that's not happening. At the scene there, the police, they run his license and whatnot, and they see there's a fresh warrant out for his arrest, for like drug charges or something like that. And with that, he's now on ice. Lulu is there back at Baisley with RAQ, but he's dead set against everything that's going on, right? And he's pointing out to her, like, look how wrong everything is going. This should indicate that you've made a mistake here. But in the midst of everything, she makes adjustments. Everything doesn't go according to plan, but she adjusts accordingly. Burke heads out into the street to see what she can find out. And Juliana, who's part of the plan, kind of reports to Burke, the police officer, that, while they're at Burke and another officer at the bodega asking questions and whatnot, and notice that their camera's set up, at which point they confiscate the video. And so, now begins this push to develop like a plan B for Kanan, right? As they've executed the part of the plan with getting the police involved. The cops show up to the building there at Baisley. They start their search and whatnot, and they just kind of ride it out as they wait for them to make their way upstairs. Once they clear the 7th floor, they start dropping the stuff from the 8th floor apartment down to the 7th, as was the plan. It's not very likely that they're going to come back to that 7th floor apartment and do another search, as they've done a pretty extensive search, right? So, her and the guys, like, they gather up the drugs and whatnot and toss it down the chute that they'd created. But a slightly funny thing to note in the scene is that it's late at night, and when the cops come into the apartment, she tries to play it off as though she lives in this apartment, that she's the tenant, there's nothing out of the way going on here, it's late at night, and, she's making food for these guys, right? She had them pick up like a chicken meal dinner and pretends like she's cooking, but really just put the stuff in the oven. The funny thing is that she has like this house coat thing, but it's just so big and shapeless that it reminded me a little bit of, if you think of Martin, right, and like Big Shirley, it looked like Big Shirley's house dress because it's just so big and shapeless on her. So the cops are here and they're searching and whatnot. The drugs have been dropped down to the floor below, and they don't really pick up on anything that's going on, right? Not even like this woman in her weird outfit. But I thought like that whole thing was just extremely funny, the house dress and whatnot, because it just looks so ridiculous. But there's a lot of activity going on. By this point, Marvin had put the jacket back in Unique's closet, and Unique and his girlfriend and son have come back home, right? He has this plan to gather them up. He's going to take them out of town for their safety, right? Get out of town as well until things kind of settle down, because there's whispers that he's been involved in Howard's shooting. But he doesn't get a chance to do that, because in the midst of them packing to leave, the police raid his apartment. And it so happens he was going to the closet to get, I guess, a jacket or whatever, when he happens to spot this particular jacket. There's blood on the sleeve and whatnot. He pulls it out of the jacket. He's looking at it, and it's right at the very moment that the cops come and just knock down the door. They throw him on the ground, start the process of arresting him. And it's like a heads will roll kind of situation, right? Realizing that whatever it is that happened to Marvin, RAQ needs to kind of figure something else out, at which point she picks up the phone and, swallowing her pride, calls my guy Symphony to come to the rescue. She picks up the phone, the person on the other end, she kind of tells them, I know that you don't want to hear from me, but if I had anyone else I could turn to, I would. I really need your help. So we jump back to the bodega, and you see that at this point, Jukebox is still with Kanan. The two of them are waiting for someone to come and pick him up. The door starts slowly opening. Juliana is there with someone, and in walks Symphony. He tells Kanan that RAQ sent him to come and pick him up and to drive him out of town. And it kind of reminded me of going back to the episode where Kanan is picked up by the police. It reminded me of going back to the episode where Kanan is picked up by the police, right? Howard takes him down to the precinct to question him, right? Initially, he tried calling his uncles, but he turned to Symphony because he couldn't get through to them. They had their own stuff going on. Whatever it is that Symphony might have had going on at that point, he cares about RAQ, right? He cares about Kanan. And whatever he had going on, he stepped in to help Kanan. And here again, RAQ has kind of learned from Kanan that in times of need that she can depend on Symphony. Here you have again, the two brothers are not really in a position to help, either because they can't or because they're unwilling. With Lulu, even if he was in better condition, it's not a guarantee that he would have taken those marching orders from RAQ, right? To have, to help Kanan be driven out of town. So it's like both of the uncles, her brothers, are out of commission, and with no one else to turn to, much as Kanan had done, RAQ turns to Symphony. She appeals to him, right, for help being that he's a stand-up guy, right? Symphony goes and picks up, Kanan. Bear in mind that he's not driving him home or something like that. He's driving him out of town. This is going to be an hours-long drive in the night where he's going to have to drive there, drive back, disrupt whatever he has going on in his life to take, Kanan to safety. But he puts all of that aside, and he does it because he's doing it for Kanan, and honestly, possibly because he's doing it for RAQ as well. Symphony, walks him out to the car to drive off. But before that, him and Jukebox say goodbye to each other. I did find it telling that neither RAQ or Jukebox hugs Kanan goodbye, though they do tell him that they love him. I don't know, it kind of stuck out to me as a weird way of saying goodbye. That they told him that they loved him. They told him goodbye, but neither one of them actually really hugged him. I mean, Jukebox and Kanan don't really hug, but I guess he's going away. It's a different situation. You don't know exactly how long he's going for, and I would take it that you'd give him a proper goodbye. But that was just something that stood out to me, that, in the midst of all of this, granted, Kanan's the one that shot the police officer, right? So they sent him out of town, but I found it telling they didn't make any provisions for Jukebox. And my question would be, if you have all this stuff going on in the neighborhood, what would the cover story be for Kanan suddenly going out of town? Especially if he's out of town, but Jukebox is still there in Queens. It turns out the reason Marvin was arrested was because of Tony, right? Some episodes back, the episode before, Symphony had told RAQ to warn Marvin about Tony, and before that we saw that Tony was talking to the cops. She was trying to get Marvin into trouble as a way of getting herself out of trouble, most likely because she has such a big mouth. She probably spoke out of turn and someone heard her talking about drugs and whatnot. So her trying to skate on some charges, she ends up telling them about Marvin and his family selling drugs. Marvin has to sit things out for a minute, but so he's out of the game for a while until that situation gets sorted. But the other person is now Lulu, And Lulu is seeming like he's going to shape up to be a problem for RAQ because he doesn't want to be in the organization anymore. He's questioning her judgment and all this kind of stuff. And I think part of it is that he has Jessica in his ear. Now, the Jessica character, the things that she says, like once they leave Baisley and he gets back into the car, as Jessica's driving the car, she's telling him the right things, which is continuing down this path is likely going to result in RAQ most likely ending up dead or in jail, meaning with the drug dealing. Him continuing down the path with her means that there's a good chance that's what's going to happen. That's going to be his future options as well. He has this record label now. He can make other moves. He can make bigger and better moves, right? Do bigger and better things beyond selling drugs. She's telling him the right things, but the way she's going about it is wrong. She's making it sort of like an antagonistic thing with RAQ, where she's like positioning RAQ as being the problem, as in, your sister is an issue, your sister's going to cause problems for you, rather than it being, listen, removing that aspect of it, which is like essentially asking him to turn his back on his family. It should be more about like, the drug business thing is not it. Leave that behind. Whereas for her, she's kind of stating it in a way of, you need to leave your sister, you need to leave your family behind. And it's not that I don't like the character, but in theory, I should like the character, but I don't really dig her. I feel like she kind of rubs me the wrong way. Like there's an earlier scene with her. To some degree, I feel like she's an opportunist, right? She's very ambitious and whatnot. That's fine. But at the same time, I kind of get the feeling that she's a little bit opportunistic. Some of that comes from her interactions with Crown. Like pointing out in an earlier conversation where, he points out that she's always pushing for more. It seems like nothing ever satisfies her, which I get because she's ambitious and whatnot. She wants more. She's willing to do more for more. But like her approach is just wrong. And in discussing RAQ, maybe I'm biased towards RAQ, but in this situation, I look at it more from the perspective of that she has a different vibe when she's in RAQ's presence. She says all this stuff when she's not around, but she doesn't challenge her or anything like that. When they were in the hospital, she didn't take that as an opportunity to speak to RAQ. She's never taken RAQ to task for putting Lulu in danger or anything like that. She pretty much keeps it on mute while RAQ is around. So it's like one of those things where I feel like, fine, feel how you feel, but keep that same energy. I'm not saying she's wrong for voicing her opinions, but rather that she needs to ensure that she'd be willing to stand behind her words if RAQ was in the room. So at the end of it, the camera kind of pans up, it moves up to like the top of the building, and it zooms in and we see looking out over everything is RAQ. She stated that she would be the last man, not in those terms, standing when everything goes down. And indeed she is, at least in this moment. She's right. Everyone else has kind of been moved out the way, and she's like the last person standing. Even if you think about it, Marvin is at the precinct. Lulu is injured in the fire, and so he's out of commission. Unique is now dealing with his own police issues. Howard is in the hospital, though, as it's pointed out, Howard is alive. His partner is alive and well, and the police immediately begin questioning him. So while everyone else is dealing with their own problems, RAQ, at least in this moment, is standing atop the building, looking down with a very satisfied look on her face. When you look at it, one of the parting lines in the narration is that in this business, you can't really trust anyone. You can trust yourself. You're the only person that you can 100% depend on, that you can 100% count on. But it's like no one else. In the narration, 50 Cent, who plays like the narrator of adult Kanan, states that you can't really trust anyone or wholeheartedly depend on anybody. And he ends by saying, not even your mother. And this is right. As RAQ is prepared to walk back into the building, she has like a smile on her face, a self-satisfied grin. The reality is that when you look at it, she's also managed to get Kanan out of town. Getting Kanan out of town is in a way like removing him from the situation. She made like this really big production, gave him this whole speech and everything about him being her son and her needing him, that she was going to bring him into the fold. She was going to teach him everything now. And she got him so amped up that he went out and he did the shooting for her. But then we see that like she's kind of sent him out of town, right? Most likely to his grandmother, which was something to note, right? This is something that he was fighting against from the beginning. But we see that ultimately she gets all of the things she wanted. And I just like the way that everything came together, right? Overall, with this season, I was just incredibly impressed with it. the wrap up at the end of the season, to me, it's like, it felt like one episode, just like one really long episode. And a lot of these things started to move into play in the 9th episode, but it's like the temp just kind of closes off the show, right? I thought the show was actually pretty incredible. I loved it. There are very few TV shows I can think of. Actually, I can't think of another TV show that I've watched back to back like this and still managed to enjoy each time, right? This is now like my 3rd time watching the show fully through. The first time I watched on my own with no real expectations. The second time I watched with my mom. And now the 3rd time watching specifically to prepare for the review so I could take notes. I feel like I enjoyed it just as much, if not more, during each successive viewing, because it's an incredible show. So far I've discussed this show with some other people who have watched, and I've yet to find someone that doesn't like the show. They might not like it as much as I do, but I've enjoyed this, and so with that, I'm definitely looking forward to the 2nd season. I'm certainly excited, and I just want to know what happens next. Thanks for tuning in. This is the last episode of the 1st season recaps as the new season premieres today. Moving forward for the 2nd season, I'm planning to drop a new recap and review episode on Mondays. Hopefully that works out. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my Rolling with RAQ playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.